Hello.
Story 1. Locating items for purchase, for me, typically does not begin with an online classifieds platform, yet sometimes, exceptional deals can be secured on commodities that would otherwise command a significantly elevated price. During that particular period, I was actively seeking fresh exercise apparatus. Acquiring new weightlifting implements and fitness machinery typically entails a substantial financial outlay, rendering the online exchange an ideal avenue for discovering pre-owned equipment at an economical cost. For several days, I diligently navigated through the website before ultimately encountering a posting that appeared exceptionally promising. It offered a collection of weights at a notably favorable price, and the advertisement had been placed just a few hours prior. The individual who created the post was identified as Mary, and I promptly dispatched an electronic mail to her, expressing my profound interest in her weight set and my desire to arrange for its immediate retrieval. Mary's response arrived merely moments later, indicating her availability that very evening once she returned home from her employment at 7 o'clock. Although the suggested time was somewhat late, it presented no considerable inconvenience for me, given my eagerness to obtain the items as soon as possible. I concurred with the arrangement, and she subsequently furnished her residential address. Naturally, I consulted an online map to ascertain its precise location and to gain an impression of the dwelling itself. The destination was situated approximately 20 minutes' drive from my current position, nestled within a modest residential district with which I was, in fact, acquainted, as an old associate of mine formerly resided nearby. The edifice possessed standard dimensions and lacked any particularly distinguishing characteristics, aside from appearing quite aged. Nevertheless, nothing seemed overtly peculiar or elicited a sense of unease, so that evening, I embarked on the journey there. The property was located at the very terminus of the thoroughfare, within a cul-de-sac. I secured my vehicle on the side of the house adjacent to their mailbox and proceeded towards the main entrance, which was already ajar. I harbored no intention of simply entering the residence unannounced, so I tapped gently on the open door several times to capture their attention. A brief moment later, a gentleman descended from the hallway. I stated my purpose, explaining that I was scheduled to meet with Mary concerning some workout merchandise she had advertised on the online exchange. The man's countenance brightened considerably, and he extended an invitation for me to step inside. He informed me that Mary would make her appearance in a few minutes, as she was in the process of changing out of her professional attire. This revelation undeniably instilled a measure of caution within me, yet his demeanor conveyed sincerity and credibility, prompting me to follow him into the dwelling's living area. Within the living area, a collection of weights was arranged upon the floor. However, apart from these weights, the room contained absolutely nothing else, no furnishings nor any decorative elements whatsoever. I believe the man observed my survey of the surroundings, as he promptly interjected, explaining that they were in the midst of relocating, which was the reason behind their efforts to sell the weights. Remaining somewhat dubious, I inspected the weights for a moment but immediately discerned that several plates were conspicuously absent. I inquired whether this constituted the entirety of the set, as I recalled perceiving a greater quantity in the posted images. He offered another smile, stating that Mary might possess knowledge of the whereabouts of the other components. Yet, he then simply remained stationary, gazing at me. A significant feeling of discomfort washed over me, and I requested if he would be so kind as to ascertain Mary's presence and inform her of my arrival. He paused for a moment before acquiescing and ascended the staircase. It was, by this juncture, becoming quite apparent that Mary might not even be a real individual. So I listened with intense focus to ensure that he was, in fact, engaging in conversation with someone. After a few seconds of profound silence, I advanced to the base of the stairs and directed my gaze upwards. The man stood there at the pinnacle, merely staring intently at the wall, likely waiting there to create the impression that he had genuinely gone to consult someone. A wave of panic overwhelmed me as I now realized that this entire situation was a fabrication, and I was likely enmeshed in something truly sinister. I began to quicken my pace towards the front exit, endeavoring not to draw the man's attention, but the instant I turned around, I distinguished the sound of heavy footfalls rapidly descending the staircase. He vociferated for me to halt as I bolted straight out through the main entrance and into my automobile. Peculiarly, as I accelerated away, the individual emerged from the front door and proceeded around the side of the dwelling. After driving beyond the confines of the neighborhood, I brought my vehicle to a stop and contacted the local authorities to apprise them of the incident, in the hope that they might be able to ascertain the nature of the events unfolding. I was not entirely certain of the man's intended scheme, but I possessed sufficient conviction that he was orchestrating something illicit. Officers subsequently arrived at my residence, and I furnished them with additional particulars. They conveyed to me that the house where I had encountered the individual had been unoccupied for a period exceeding 1 year, a revelation that sent shivers through my entire being. Naturally, however, I could not supply them with an abundance of useful intelligence beyond a description of the man's physical appearance. Aside from that, their sole investigative leads were the weights he had placed in the vacant house, which might potentially yield fingerprints. It remains a source of apprehension for me that he might still be at large, endeavoring to entice unsuspecting individuals into abandoned residences, yet I am also profoundly relieved that I managed to escape the situation before he executed whatever nefarious plot he had envisioned. Story 2. Having recently completed my college studies, I found myself in need of a modest living space while actively seeking new employment opportunities. I was engaged in part-time work at a compact grocery establishment, but with my recent graduation, the time had arrived to pursue a more substantial career. In any event, renting entire apartments independently proved prohibitively expensive, so my search primarily focused on residences offering spare rooms for lease. I acknowledged that living within someone else's abode would likely involve an initial period of awkwardness, but to be frank, I possessed limited alternatives. A former college roommate of mine suggested exploring the online exchange, as most other online platforms at that time did not facilitate the posting of individual rooms within a house, or perhaps it was simply exceptionally challenging to locate them there. Regardless, the online exchange appeared to present a profusion of available choices, so I continued to utilize it. After a few days, however, a sense of frustration began to mount, as none of the individuals I contacted would respond to my inquiries, and those who did would merely offer apologies, stating that the room had already been secured. Then, on a particular Saturday morning, a new room advertisement appeared. It was geographically proximate, economically priced, and visually appealing. Within the description, an individual named Tom was advertising it as a spacious house featuring a vacant bedroom available for rent, which also boasted its own separate lavatory and wardrobe space. This sounded absolutely ideal to me, so I promptly sent him an electronic mail expressing my interest before commencing my workday. Knowing the listing had been posted only that morning, I felt confident that I was among the first to establish contact with him. During my lunch interval, I checked my electronic correspondence, and Tom had replied, inviting me to view the property that very afternoon. I was aware that I would likely be fatigued following work, but my desire for this particular place was also exceptionally strong, so I agreed, and we formalized a time for the viewing. Upon concluding my work, I drove directly to the location, which was merely about 10 minutes away. From its exterior, the house presented a remarkably pleasing appearance. It genuinely resembled a standard, medium-sized residential dwelling in a typical neighborhood. I parked my vehicle on the side of the thoroughfare and approached the entrance, then tapped lightly. After approximately 30 seconds, I tapped again, this time with slightly more force. A minute later, I retrieved my mobile device with the intention of sending Tom a text message, but just prior to dispatching it, he opened the door and extended an invitation for me to enter. I immediately observed that he was profusely perspiring, as though he had just completed an arduous physical exertion, and he emitted an unpleasant odor. I had no wish to appear impolite or anything of the sort, so I simply overlooked it. He commenced guiding me around the ground floor, showcasing the kitchen and the living room. He remarked that he did not frequently utilize these areas, so I would not need to be concerned about impeding his activities. From the appearance of the rooms, however, it seemed as though he used them far too often. Old culinary utensils were amassed in the sink, and the sofa bore numerous stains. I found the overall uncleanliness of the place quite displeasing, and it was perplexing that, in the pictures, the house had appeared remarkably pristine. One detail I distinctly recalled was that the living room in the photograph featured a brown leather sofa, whereas the actual sofa present was black. I surmised that Tom likely utilized images of the house from years prior, before it had been sold. While slightly irked by the evident dishonesty, what truly mattered to me was the prospective room, which was situated on the upper floor. Tom led the way towards the staircase, then paused upon reaching the bottom of the steps and extended his hand in a gestural manner, as if indicating for me to ascend first. As I began my ascent, a peculiar and uncomfortable sensation enveloped me, particularly as Tom did not follow me. He remained at the bottom, smiling, and stated that my room would be the first one on the left. I proceeded to the top and took a few steps into the hallway before a soft thud emanated from behind the door of what was purported to be my room. I glanced back down the stairs at Tom, whose smile had now entirely vanished. He responded in an irritated tone, informing me that it was merely one of his acquaintances staying for the night and that I should not be concerned about it. He then urged me to inspect the room for myself, expressing his certainty that I would find it to my liking. At this juncture, I was undeniably quite apprehensive, even frightened. Why would he not have disclosed that someone else was present? It seemed like information I ought to be privy to. Everything began to align, and my singular desire was to depart the premises immediately. I endeavored to project an air of confidence and began descending the stairs, explaining that the place would simply not be suitable for me. He did not appear to favor that response, and he adjusted his body to obstruct the majority of the staircase's bottom. I stood a couple of steps away and firmly reiterated that I needed to leave. He again requested that I inspect the bedroom, if only to ascertain whether I liked it, and once more, I stated I was not interested. He observed me for a moment, then to my surprise, he smiled and uttered, "Okay," stepping aside. I swiftly walked past him and directly out the front door. I remain uncertain as to the happenings within that house, but something about the entire situation felt inherently wrong. I even considered myself fortunate to have been able to leave with such ease. In that moment, I had anticipated needing to force my way out. A few hours later, I checked the online exchange, and the listing had been removed. I still ponder who and what was occupying that room upstairs. For all I know, it could have simply been an unoccupied space, but an instinct tells me that it was something considerably more sinister. Story 3. For several years during my college tenure, I shared a small dwelling with a friend whom I shall refer to as Nick. He served as my roommate for the initial year, and subsequently, we collectively decided to vacate the dormitory accommodations and jointly contribute to the rent of a house, as both of us held reasonably stable employment. This marked the first instance for both of us renting a property, so we lacked adequate knowledge regarding proper financial budgeting. For a few months, everything proceeded acceptably, but it was nearly a year into our tenancy when we recognized that this residence was rapidly depleting both of our financial accounts. The obvious resolutions presented themselves: either relocate or secure an additional roommate. Neither of us wished to depart, so we initiated the search for a new cohabitant. We began by inquiring among all of our other friends, but none expressed interest. Consequently, the sole remaining option was to create an online advertisement. I posted on the Community Connect marketplace, and Nick placed an advertisement on the online exchange. Again, neither of us had ever undertaken such a task, and it felt somewhat peculiar, but we understood we had limited alternatives. A few weeks elapsed with only a handful of responses, none of which demonstrated serious consideration for moving in, before Nick showed me an electronic mail he had received from an individual named Sam, in reply to his advertisement on the online exchange. The gentleman seemed legitimate, and on the subsequent day, he came to view the house. I should mention that he was a couple of years our senior and had recently graduated, but he appeared quite pleasant and presented a clean and well-kept appearance, so we were pleased to have him. He agreed to the division of rent and relocated the following week. In the ensuing few months, Sam frequently spent time with us, and we genuinely became quite well acquainted with him. However, quite abruptly, he became remarkably reclusive for some inexplicable reason. Nick and I would scarcely ever encounter the individual, and when we did, he would not even engage in conversation. For the most part, he would remain in his room with his door secured, emerging only to acquire sustenance or to commute to his employment. This did not inherently trouble me, I simply found it a trifle odd. In any case, it was approximately the 4th month of his residency that circumstances began to deteriorate significantly. I had just returned home from my job, and the instant I passed through the entrance, Nick quietly called my name from the living room. "What is occurring?" I inquired. He murmured that Sam was at home, advising me not to speak too loudly. He then informed me about a potent odor he had detected earlier that day when passing Sam's room. I stated that I had not perceived it. He gestured down the corridor toward Sam's room and instructed me to walk past quietly and ascertain if I noticed it. So, I rose and proceeded silently down the hall towards Sam's door. I did not even have to approach very closely to discern the stench of which he spoke. It was dreadful and truly repugnant. I possessed no idea what it was and had definitively never smelled anything akin to it in the house before. Nick proposed that we inquire of him what the odor was, and I assented. Both of us approached his door, attempting to minimize our inhalation, and knocked, then knocked again and again, calling out to him. He did not respond. Nick asserted his certainty that Sam was present inside, but after a couple more minutes, we simply conceded and decided we would question him the following day. It was already quite late at this point, so we both prepared a quick supper and then ate while watching television in the living room, after which we both retired for the night. The subsequent day, I intercepted Sam as he was departing the house and inquired about the smell from the previous night. "Oh, I was merely taking out the refuse," he stated. He promptly exited and drove off. That particular response did not resonate with me in any logical manner, but I did not wish to press him too vehemently. I recounted the exchange to Nick later that day, and he concurred that it was peculiar but did not know what else could be done, so we left the matter at that. Another couple of weeks transpired. Again, Sam scarcely conversed with us, but the odor had by then dissipated. I returned home from work late one evening, and Nick and Sam were both in their respective rooms, likely already asleep, so I essentially proceeded directly to my own room and also fell asleep. However, sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke, perceiving some movement beneath my room, which was where Sam's room was situated downstairs. I listened for a few minutes, endeavoring to ascertain his activity, but eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The following morning, Sam hurried out of the house to attend to his employment as was his custom. Nevertheless, he did not return home that night. Another couple of days would pass, and he still had not come back. I attempted to contact him multiple times, but his telephone instantly diverted to voicemail. We were, in fact, beginning to grow concerned and resolved to inspect his room for any indications as to what was transpiring. His room was quite disheveled and actually appeared as though a considerable portion of his possessions had been packed and removed. I also discovered a pair of spectacles in his drawer along with some other miscellaneous belongings, which was odd because Sam did not wear eyewear. He had, however, left behind some clothing and all of his furnishings, which led us to believe that he had not simply moved out abruptly. Nick ultimately contacted the police to report Sam as potentially missing, and an officer arrived that evening to conduct an investigation and pose questions to us. We conveyed to him everything we knew and permitted him to examine the room. Nick also provided him with a photograph we had taken together when Sam had first moved in. Following that, we received no update until a week later. A different detective contacted us and informed us that the identity of the man in the photograph with us was, in fact, not Sam. They stated that a family member recognized them as their missing son, who had been gone for nearly a year. After this revelation, the case became considerably more intricate, and we possessed little useful information because the individual had essentially misrepresented everything he had told us. Consequently, after a short period, we lost contact and ceased receiving updates. As far as we were apprised, the man was merely an ordinary individual residing with his parents who had suddenly vanished for no known reason. He never returned to our house, however, and I am uncertain if he was ever located. It is definitively the most intriguing and unsettling experience I have encountered, simply the awareness that I was cohabiting with an individual who had fabricated a completely false identity and was legally designated as missing gives me chills every single time I reflect upon it. It is quite challenging not to surmise that this man was attempting to conceal himself from law enforcement due to some past transgression he had committed or was actively engaged in.
Bye.